Hello there, welcome to Hoojies Garage. I'm standing here behind a Henderson Model K from 1920, so it's more than 100 years old. I think this is a really cool and interesting bike. As you can see, it has an inline 4, 1.3 liters. It should be possible to reach some 120 kilometers per hour with this bike 100 years ago. Quite something. The power, well, it's somewhere just above 20 horsepower, and it has a 3-speed gearbox. And this specific bike has an interesting history. It was sold new in Sweden in 1920, of course. And the first owner, I don't know the name of the first owner, but I know the name of the second owner because he was quite a rich guy, or let's say like this, he was living in a rich family in those days. Of course, this is not a cheap bike. It was not cheap new, and it is not cheap today. Now, he was studying at the university for agriculture, and well, apparently he had money enough to buy this thing, so he bought it. But then it was just a solo bike, no sidecar, and he rode it for some time, but he went off the road, or there was some accident of some kind. I mean, just look at this, is the brake of this bike. So yeah, you can imagine that it's easy to end up where you shouldn't be. So already, I think it was like in 1924 or something like that, he handed it over to a workshop and they repaired it, but he was eager to ride a bike like this again, so he bought an Ace. And what is an Ace then? Well, it's kind of the same type of bike. And Ace was founded by Henderson, because Henderson and, well, the Henderson brothers, they started making bikes like these in 1912, I think it was. And that was kind of a not so good timing, because in, I think it was 1914, the First World War broke out, and then, you know, the whole global economy went down. So by 1917 they had huge issues in getting the company to be successful. So they sold it to Excelsior and the manufacturing moved from Detroit to Chicago. And they worked there at Excelsior making Henderson bikes. But Excelsior management wanted the bikes to be a bit more on the comfortable side and, let's say, luxury side, so to speak. And by the time that this specific bike was ready, the Henderson brothers left Excelsior, and William G., the guy that worked with the, let's say, engineering or technical development, he founded Ace. So an Ace bike is also in a way a Henderson bike. And he brought with him Arthur Lemon, that was his companion working on the technical development of the bikes. Now, just a few years later, William Henderson died in an accident. He was out riding an Ace model year 20, what was it, 22, 23 something. And there was a car coming and he was hit, and that was that. Arthur Lemon tried to keep the company Ace running, and they did sell bikes for a few more years, but by 1927 the company was sold to Indian. So if you see an Indian with a straight 4 or an inline 4 similar to this concept, then you know the reason why. Indian continued to make straight or inline 4-cylinder bikes into the early 1940s. So they made them in parallel to their V-twins. Now, this bike, well, there was a family that bought the bike. There were 2 carpenters living in a nearby city. They had been working in the USA and had made a bit of money. So they bought this bike together. because yeah, being a kind of normal employee, then it's not always that easy to buy something like this. But they bought it together, and they bought a sidecar. The bike is prepared for carrying a sidecar. It has even attachment areas. Here you can see one, and on the other side there's the same thing. And as I said, the gearbox was optional with a reverse gear. So the bike was for sure intended to be able to carry or to drive a sidecar like this. So they bought this bike and put the sidecar on, and they used it for some years. It was getting worn, so they repainted it in black. But by the start of the Second World War, the bike was pretty worn and the engine wasn't running well. They had tried to put on another carburetor on it and so on. But by 1939, when the Second World War started, they just, no, this bike has had its time. So they just pushed it into a shed. And into the shed this bike went, and it just stood there. Or even the sidecar was even standing on the outside. And in the shed they stored wood for heating up the house. And then by the late 60s, 1960s, the current owner of this bike was talking to a friend, and they were just discussing, you know, he was in his early 20s, or maybe he was even, yeah, he was 20 years old, I think. And then he talked to his buddy and said, well, it would be fun to have some kind of an old bike to, you know, restore it and ride it for fun. And then his friend said, I know a bike. It's just been standing in a shed not so far away from here. So let's go there. And they went there and found this bike behind a lot of piled wood. And the owner, the current owner, didn't really know then what's a Henderson, but he saw, well, when they had took away or removed some wood, then they could see that, oh, this is a 4-cylinder bike, American, Henderson, what's that? So he called kind of a local small dealer and asked him, well, what do you know about Henderson? Henderson, okay. Anyhow, but he bought it. And so during that time, like around 1970 or something like that, in his early 20s, he restored this bike to the condition where it is right now. And he has painted it blue again, as it was initially, and decided to keep the sidecar and to paint it in matching colors. And yeah, it's still today, it's a very nice bike, and he's riding it on some kind of rallies or something like that, just for fun. It has quite a few interesting details. For instance, the handlebar, it's very, what should you call it, tall or long, so it's almost a bit like a rudder. The handles themselves don't twist, the whole tube here twists, and here you have ignition and here you have the throttle, of course. The single brake has two what should you call that? Shoes, maybe you could call it, even though the one is on the outside. Yeah, and the brake is being maneuvered by the right-hand pedal. Exactly. And the left one is clutch. Yeah, so you can operate the clutch both with a lever and the pedal. Kickstarter, reverse gear, and shifting normal gears, I would think. No, probably that one. That's probably the gear. Yep. Anyhow, the engine as such is kind of interesting. Separate cylinders, bit more than 300. Oh, it should be around 300. No, bit more than 300 cc each. Side valves. I'll show you the other side in a minute. And the whole engine block is split horizontally, and it goes all the way, so it contains the crankshaft, the clutch and the gearbox. So it's for sure a monoblock design from that perspective. The clutch runs in oil, and it's a steel clutch, so it doesn't wear. And I mean, if you would have to do some service on the clutch, then you would have to split the engine. The engine is said to be the first one with pressurized lubrication. Otherwise, bikes from these days, they had a little pump, so you got oil into something and then you set something to drip, or other systems where you pushed in oil, then you had to push every 5 kilometers or something, or operate the oil pump like that. So this bike was, yeah, really modern for its time. Right, and then as you can see, there's a little gas tube. That's for lighting. The headlight comes a little hose with the gas from it. So it's a bit more modern than the older ones where you had water dripping on carbide, I think it's called, to develop the gas in a little container. There's even a little gas light on the sidecar as well. Yeah, here we have the opposite side of the engine, side valves, a little carburetor, and no rail air filter. Don't know, that wasn't important in those days apparently. And no muffler, no silencer, just a straight pipe. Henderson as such, the brand was discontinued around 1930, I think, when the Depression came. But by then the engine had developed quite well. The KL model delivered some 45 horsepower and could manage 180 kilometers per hour. Here we have Jan Erik. Time to start. Muffler, sounds good. One can see the Shut up. Okej, kan jag hoppa i nu? Ja. That were around here 100 years ago. Gravel roads like this. It's not that often that I use this leather helmet, could one call it that? Anyhow, very interesting bike, that Henderson. And it really rides and drives well. I'm surprised it's over 100 years old and it performs like that. That's really something. Now, someone might think, but how could they put such a little tiny brake on the on the left rear wheel when it was that quick? Now, the traffic environment in those days just didn't require anything more. That was sufficient. They must have thought, of course. Now, and to put things into a little bit of perspective, a couple of years ago, I had a very interesting test drive in a Porsche 959. And after the test drive, I looked a bit, because I'm curious, you know, I looked in the owner's manual, and already in the beginning of the manual it says, please observe that from 320 kilometers per hour, the stopping distance under ideal conditions is 428 meters. But no one has really complained that the brakes on the Porsche 959 are bad or not sufficient. However, that puts things into a bit of perspective. That's all from Hoojies Garage today. Take care. More will come. Bye-bye.